Have you ever felt unseen until you finally chose to walk away? Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything to avoid facing their own souls. Sometimes, your absence speaks louder than your presence." This moment right now is your invitation to reclaim your worth, to step back not in anger, but in power. What if walking away isn't the end, but the beginning of being truly respected? Let's explore that truth together. Carl Jung believed that the human psyche is a vast inner landscape shaped not only by personal experiences, but by universal patterns, symbols, and transformations that echo through every culture, every myth, and every individual. Within this framework lies the archetype of detachment, not as an act of abandonment, but as a symbolic journey toward integration and authenticity. Walking away is not merely a behavioral tactic or a reaction to emotional mistreatment. It is a psychological ritual embedded deep within the structure of the self. It represents the separation from illusions, dependencies, and personas that no longer serve the true essence of the individual. When a person walks away from a place, a relationship, or a situation that denies their value, they are not just leaving. They are stepping into the energy of the archetypal wanderer, the seeker, or the hermit, all of which are found in dreams, myths, and sacred stories across time. Walking away to gain respect is misunderstood when seen only through the lens of ego or strategy. Jung taught that individuation, the process of becoming whole, is not possible without a confrontation with the unconscious. And often, it is through withdrawal, silence, and separation that the unconscious finally begins to speak. When we stay in situations that diminish us, it is often because we have unconsciously merged with an image of ourselves that lacks worth. We become entangled in the projections of others, trapped in the roles we are expected to perform. But the moment one withdraws, something remarkable begins to occur. The mask breaks, the role dissolves. The authentic self begins to re-emerge from beneath the debris of social conditioning and emotional obligation. To walk away in the Jungian sense is not to abandon responsibility, but to claim it fully. It is to recognize that remaining in a dynamic that erodes self-worth is a betrayal of the soul. And Jung consistently reminded us that the soul does not tolerate betrayal forever. Eventually, symptoms emerge: anxiety, depression, emotional exhaustion. These are not signs of weakness, but cries from the deeper layers of the psyche, signaling that the current external structure no longer supports internal growth. When a person walks away from disrespect, they are not simply reacting, they are listening to the deeper voice within, the self, that is always orienting us toward wholeness. In dreams, the motif of departure often carries immense psychological meaning. A train leaving the station, a person walking down an empty road, a plane lifting off from the ground. These are not just symbols of movement, but of transition from one stage of consciousness to another. Jung taught that symbols are the language of the unconscious, and these images of departure signal a necessary disidentification from the old. In waking life, walking away is the living enactment of this symbolic departure. It is a rejection not of people, but of patterns. It is the moment when a person says, "I will no longer participate in a dynamic that demands I shrink to be accepted." Yet, this act is not easy. It is often accompanied by guilt, confusion, fear, and uncertainty. This is why Jung emphasized the value of shadow work. When you walk away, you are forced to confront the parts of yourself that were invested in staying. These may include the inner child who still longs for approval, the pleaser who survives by keeping the peace, or the wounded self that equates love with sacrifice. All of these internal figures form part of what Jung would call the personal unconscious. To walk away is to begin the integration of these parts, not by denying them, but by choosing a new relationship with them. You can still acknowledge the pain, but you no longer have to build your life around it. There is also a transformational effect on those from whom you walk away. Jung often spoke about the psychic tension between individuals. Relationships are energetic systems, and every action within them produces a psychological reaction. When you remain accessible to someone who does not respect your value, you reinforce a shared delusion, one that says this imbalance is acceptable. But when you remove yourself from the dynamic, you disrupt the unconscious agreement. The other person is now confronted with a void, an absence, a mirror. They are forced to reckon with their own projections and behaviors. In this way, your withdrawal becomes a catalyst for their confrontation with their shadow. Walking away becomes a symbolic statement to the psyche and to the world. I am no longer who I was in your presence. This act alone initiates a restructuring of identity. And it's here that real respect begins, not because you demanded it, but because you demonstrated it inwardly. Jung's concept of the self, the organizing principle of the unconscious, is activated not by outer validation, but by inner alignment. The act of leaving is sacred when done from a place of inner truth. It is not abandonment, it is initiation. The journey of individuation cannot proceed when we are bound by roles that deny our dignity. Walking away from such roles is not selfish, it is psychological maturity. It says to the world, and more importantly to your own soul, I am ready to become who I truly am, even if it means being misunderstood. In doing so, you invite others to meet you at a new frequency, one defined not by compliance but by authenticity. Carl Jung understood that all great transformation involves a departure. The hero must leave the village. The seeker must venture into the forest, and the soul, when ready, must walk away, not to escape life, but to finally meet it on one's own terms. Respect is not something that can be demanded, chased or begged for. It is a reflection of one's relationship with oneself. Carl Jung understood that what we experience in the outer world is often a projection of our inner condition. In the dynamics of human relationships, people tend to mirror how we treat ourselves. If we continue to show up in places where our presence is undervalued, it reveals an unconscious agreement with the idea that we are not worthy of more. Jung's psychological insight into the power of self-perception teaches us that people do not respect us because we convince them to. They respect us when we no longer tolerate being disrespected. It is in this subtle shift that a person begins to understand that true change is not about controlling others, but about aligning one's actions with inner value. In many ways, the respect we seek from others must begin with a confrontation with our own shadow. According to Jung, the shadow represents those aspects of ourselves we repress, deny, or avoid, the parts that feel unlovable, unworthy, or inadequate. When we lack boundaries or allow ourselves to be treated poorly, it often stems from unacknowledged shadow beliefs. Somewhere deep within, we might feel that mistreatment is deserved, or that respect must be earned through sacrifice. These unconscious scripts operate silently, influencing our choices and tolerances. Jung believed that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our lives and we will call it fate. This is especially true in relationships. If we accept less than we deserve, it is rarely by accident, it is because something within us still believes that this is all we are worthy of. To earn respect by walking away, therefore, is not about performance, it is about deep inner recognition. The moment you stop arguing for your value and begin acting as if it is already a given, something shifts energetically in your relationships. People begin to sense a different presence, not aggressive, not loud, but stable and inwardly grounded. Jungian psychology sees this as the process of individuation, where the individual no longer lives for the validation of the external world, but moves toward inner integration and wholeness. In this process, the person begins to withdraw their projections, the hopes that someone else will fulfill what they have not yet given themselves. Respecting yourself first is the foundation of this transformation. It is an inward act, not an outward demand. It involves noticing the ways we betray our own needs, silence our truth, or make ourselves smaller to fit into spaces that do not accommodate our full presence. Self-respect is not always about confidence, it is often about grief. It means mourning the times you abandoned yourself just to be accepted. But this mourning is also a turning point, the beginning of a more conscious life. Jung emphasized that the psyche always strives toward balance and healing. The more we honor our internal boundaries, the more the outer world begins to reflect back that clarity. The respect that emerges from walking away is often unexpected. It appears not because the other person has changed, but because you have. You are no longer seeking permission to exist. You are no longer waiting for someone else to see you clearly. Instead, you have stepped into your own center. And this act, though silent, speaks volumes. Jung's work often pointed to the power of inner alignment, how the invisible movements of the soul shape visible reality. The way you carry yourself, the energy you inhabit when you walk into a room, or the boundaries you silently maintain. These are all reflections of your inner psychological structure. People respond to that structure. They sense when a person has reclaimed their own authority. There is a fundamental difference between those who seek respect and those who live in it. The former often feel as though they must prove, argue, or earn their value. The latter simply embody it. This is not arrogance, it is integrity. Jung saw the journey of becoming whole as one of integration, not perfection. It is not about eliminating all flaws or projecting an ideal self-image. Rather, it is about fully owning both your strength and your vulnerability without needing to be approved of for either. When someone walks away from disrespect, it is rarely because they believe they are better than others. It is because they have stopped believing they are less. Psychologically, this moment of departure is incredibly powerful. It breaks the unconscious contract that says, "I will stay here, even if it costs me my peace." The moment that contract is broken, a new energy is born. That energy carries clarity, purpose, and an unshakable sense of self-worth. From this place, respect flows naturally, not as a reward, but as a reflection. Others may begin to mirror the new standard, or they may fall away. Either outcome is a form of alignment. Jung often taught that when one moves closer to the self, the true integrated core of the psyche, life begins to reorganize itself around that center. This includes people, opportunities, and even the kinds of challenges one attracts. Walking away, then, is more than just a boundary, it is a declaration of identity. It tells the unconscious, and the world around you, that you have chosen to live in alignment with your truth. The discomfort that follows, loneliness, uncertainty, doubt, is part of the old structure dissolving. But in time, this space becomes fertile ground for new forms of connection, based not on need, but on mutual respect. Carl Jung's insights remain profoundly relevant in this regard. He taught that the path to wholeness requires us to step away from anything that fragments our spirit. In doing so, we don't just gain the respect of others, we earn the right to live as our truest, most undivided selves. Carl Jung taught that all relationships are psychic fields, subtle yet powerful exchanges of energy, projections, and unconscious dynamics that shape how we interact and what we experience in others. To understand why walking away often increases one's perceived value, we must first understand the nature of projection itself. In every connection, each person projects elements of their inner world onto the other, often unknowingly. These projections might include unmet needs, fantasies, fears, and unresolved parts of the self. In Jungian psychology, projection is not just a defensive mechanism, it is an essential phase of psychological development. However, trouble arises when we remain unaware that we are projecting, or when we become the projection screen for others without ever being seen for who we truly are. This is why walking away becomes such a psychologically disruptive act. It interrupts the flow of projection. When you are present and accessible, others may interact not with your true self, but with the idea of you that lives in their unconscious. But when you detach, when you remove yourself from their field, you strip them of the canvas. In that absence, they are forced to confront not only your real worth, but also the unreliability of their own inner narratives. This is the hidden dynamic behind the phenomenon, where people begin to recognize your value only after you've walked away. It is not always a sudden realization of your importance, but often the collapse of the fantasy they had projected onto you. Your detachment becomes a mirror, not just for them, but for you. Jung emphasized the value of reflection, not as passive self-analysis, but as a process of conscious recognition. The act of stepping away, especially from dynamics where you feel diminished, forces both parties into reflection. For the one who walks away, it is a confrontation with the inner parts that allowed disrespect to persist. For the one left behind, it is an encounter with the void, with the emotional and symbolic absence you leave behind. That space, filled now with silence instead of interaction, becomes a container for psychological insight. It invites a re-evaluation of what was once taken for granted. The question then arises, not why did they leave, but why didn't I see them clearly before? This moment, subtle and internal, is often the seed of transformation. Jung believed that the unconscious uses life circumstances to initiate deeper awareness. When someone walks away, the immediate loss may stir regret, confusion, or even anger. But beneath those reactions is often a deeper realization that respect cannot be assumed, only earned, and that people are not obligated to remain in dynamics that deny their dignity. When you detach, you give others the chance to grow, not through confrontation, but through the weight of your absence. It's not about teaching someone a lesson, it's about creating space for consciousness to emerge. This is the quiet power of detachment. Jung understood that psychological transformation rarely comes from direct instruction. It emerges through symbols, metaphors, and lived experiences that speak more deeply than logic ever could. Walking away becomes a symbolic act, a gesture that says, "I will no longer exist in a space that diminishes my wholeness." That action, though silent, communicates more powerfully than any argument. And because it is an act of integrity, rather than performance, its impact is lasting. In many cases, people begin to respect what they previously ignored, not because you changed, but because your removal forced them to change how they see you. In Jungian therapy, clients often come to realize that their repeated patterns, whether in love, work, or family, are not accidents but symbolic reenactments of internal dynamics. When someone consistently finds themselves in situations where they are disrespected or undervalued, it is important not just to focus on the external actors, but to explore the inner landscape that allows those dynamics to persist. What part of the self is being projected outward and misunderstood? What inner belief is keeping you tied to a narrative that no longer serves you? Walking away is not just physical departure, it is psychic separation from the old story. To detach with dignity is to reclaim your symbolic energy. It is to take back the parts of yourself that were entangled in the illusions of others. Jung taught that healing often begins with the withdrawal of projections. This is a painful process. It means realizing that you were not seen, or that you allowed yourself to be seen through a distorted lens. But it is also a liberating process, because once the projection is withdrawn, so is the emotional dependency that held it in place. You begin to see yourself more clearly, not as someone needing to prove their worth, but as someone already complete. The psychological impact of walking away is also cumulative. The first time you do it, there may be doubt and fear. The second time, clarity. Eventually, it becomes a natural act of self-respect. Not because you enjoy leaving, but because you understand the cost of staying where your soul cannot breathe. Jung would say that each time you align with your inner truth, you move closer to individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are. Detachment is one of the many doors through which the self enters. It is not the loud protest of ego, but the quiet strength of one who has remembered their worth. In the end, the respect you receive after walking away is not the result of manipulation or strategy. It is the natural echo of psychological alignment. People begin to see you through a clearer lens because you are no longer participating in a distorted narrative. They are left to confront what was real, what was imagined, and what they chose to overlook. This confrontation, uncomfortable as it may be, is often what awakens the deepest respect, not just for you, but for themselves. And it all began because you were willing to step away, to trust the silence, and to let your absence speak in the language of the soul. Carl Jung believed that the psyche is not a chaotic system, but a deeply ordered structure, seeking balance, growth, and wholeness. Just as the physical body has an immune system to protect it from harm, so too does the soul possess a mechanism that alerts us to what violates our inner integrity. This mechanism, though subtle and often ignored, speaks through intuition, discomfort, recurring emotional patterns, and psychological symptoms. In Jungian psychology, the failure to listen to this inner guidance leads to a fragmentation of the self. Walking away from toxic people or situations, therefore, is not merely an emotional reaction, it is a profound psychological necessity. It is the soul's way of drawing boundaries where the ego has hesitated to act. Boundaries, in Jung's view, are not simply lines drawn between individuals, they are expressions of the psyche's attempt to preserve wholeness. When we allow ourselves to remain in relationships where we are consistently disrespected, dismissed, or diminished, we are not just enduring pain, we are participating in our own psychic disintegration. Jung taught that everything we endure externally must first be tolerated internally. If you stay in a space that consistently undermines your self-worth, it is because something within has not yet found the courage to say, "I deserve better." This is not a moral failure, it is a signal from the unconscious that more integration is needed. Walking away becomes, then, not an act of rejection, but of self-preservation. Jung emphasized that individuation, the lifelong process of becoming one's true self, requires withdrawal from collective patterns and toxic dynamics. When you begin to individuate, you naturally start shedding the roles you once played to earn love, approval, or belonging. You realize that loyalty to others must never come at the cost of betrayal to yourself. The act of walking away from a toxic person or environment is a symbolic death of those false roles. It is a statement to the unconscious, "I no longer define myself by how much I can endure." That statement, once internalized, becomes the cornerstone of new identity, built not on survival. Walking away also brings to the surface the shadow, those rejected, hidden aspects of ourselves that we have disowned. When you finally take the step to leave a situation that no longer serves you, you may be confronted with guilt, doubt, fear, or even shame. These emotions are not signs that you have done something wrong, they are remnants of the old conditioning that told you self-worth was earned through sacrifice. Jung believed that the shadow must be confronted and integrated in order for true healing to take place. By facing these emotions and walking away anyway, you reclaim the exiled parts of yourself that once needed external validation to feel safe. There is also the deeper symbolic reality that when you walk away from disrespect, you are no longer living according to the projections others have placed on you. You are reclaiming your own image, your own truth, and your own narrative. Jung saw the self as the unifying center of the psyche, the totality of who we are, conscious and unconscious. The more we live from this center, the less we are swayed by manipulation, emotional chaos, or the need to be understood by everyone. You begin to recognize that you are not obligated to shrink just because someone else is uncomfortable with your growth. You are not required to stay simply because you once did, and you are not responsible for carrying the weight of someone else's unhealed wounds. Walking away from what no longer aligns with your values is a sacred act in Jungian terms. It signals a movement toward integration, a shift from fragmentation to coherence. Even when it is done quietly, without confrontation or explanation, it resonates loudly in the psyche. It declares, "I now prioritize my own evolution." This act is not one of cruelty or bitterness, but of deep psychological health. It reflects a commitment to the individuation process, where the goal is not to fix others or change them, but to walk the path that is true for you, even when it requires solitude or loss. Jung also taught that the psyche operates through symbols, and every action carries with it symbolic meaning. Walking away from toxicity symbolizes more than distance. It represents the transformation from the archetype of the victim to that of the sovereign. The victim believes they are trapped, powerless, or bound to cycles they cannot change. The sovereign understands that while they cannot control others, they can always choose themselves. This transformation does not come from domination or revenge, but from presence and clarity. It is not about proving your worth but living it, not about changing them but freeing you. Even the silence that follows such a departure holds psychological weight. Jung saw silence as fertile ground for the unconscious to speak. When you remove yourself from toxic patterns, you create a space where new insights, new energy, and new possibilities can emerge. The absence of noise, chaos, or manipulation becomes a sanctuary where the psyche can begin to realign with its natural rhythm. This silence is not emptiness, it is renewal, and within it, you may finally hear the voice of your own self, whispering truths that were drowned out for too long. Walking away is a return to psychological responsibility. It is a movement away from blame and toward self-ownership. Jung believed that no real growth is possible without first recognizing where we have participated in our own suffering. By walking away, you not only step out of a harmful situation, but also step into your own authority. You declare that your energy is sacred, your time is meaningful, and your peace is non-negotiable. And in doing so, you awaken something powerful, not just within yourself, but within the collective unconscious, where your act becomes a symbol for others who are still finding their way. Carl Jung understood that boundaries are not barriers but bridges to deeper self-awareness, to authentic relationships, and to a life lived in harmony with the soul. When you walk away from what fractures your spirit, you are not running from difficulty, you are walking toward wholeness. Throughout this exploration, we have seen that walking away is far more than a simple act of leaving. It is a profound psychological journey, deeply rooted in the soul's quest for wholeness. Carl Jung's insights illuminate how detachment serves as a rite of passage, a mirror for both self and others, and a powerful boundary that protects the integrity of the self. Respect arises not from demand or manipulation, but from authentic alignment with one's inner truth. By embracing the courage to walk away from what diminishes us, we awaken the archetypal forces within, honor our shadow, and invite transformation. In stepping into this sacred space of separation, we do not abandon life, we claim it fully, inviting others to meet us as the whole, integrated beings we are destined to become.